For this painting, I wanted to paint a simple path with some fields, and for a change, not do any big mountains. I usually do mountains. They're a major feature of most of my paintings, but I wanted to try to see if I could make them interesting without. I think I managed it, but there were a few problems. I'm going to show you how I use the select tool in a minute, a quick demonstration. Okay, so back to it. We're using the select tool here, and I'm blocking in some trees. I don't attempt to make them look really like trees. I'm just blocking in nice shapes. That's really all I'm interested in. And filling up some of the bigger spaces. If you have some really big spaces, you have to fill them up, because your eye doesn't like seeing these big spaces with not much detail in, so it'd be rare that I leave too many spaces. One thing I do here is make sure the path has shadows on the sides, otherwise the path will be too flat. As we walk down paths, we wear it down so the edges always come up. So a nice little trick to make them look a little bit more realistic is have shadows around the edges. Full disclosure, this is my second attempt at this painting. I had the same idea with the path, and I was going to put some farm houses in the background. I don't, because I ended up having no room for them. My last painting, I got overconfident and I tried too hard, and I ended up having too much detail within the big shapes. So like I said earlier, you need to break them up, but you need to be a bit careful not to put too much detail in them, or it can get confusing. So as you see this path I'm doing now, it's already looking a bit detailed. So luckily here I notice and I drop the detail by making sure the colors are not too different. But in my other attempt, I had far too much detail in the path and it looked really confusing. I got annoyed and I deleted that and started it again. So it doesn't always go well for me either, and quite often I just stop and start again. You need to be okay with deleting things and saying it's not going to work. Luckily with this style, it usually only takes me 30-40 minutes to paint an entire painting. So the last painting I deleted was about 20 minutes in. So it's not a big deal. It's not like it's 4 hours and I delete it. So, but you still need to be confident enough to delete those too. So back to the painting. I'm putting in some highlights over the basic block-ins. I've decided the sun is coming from the right. The reason I do that is a very specific reason. Is that you see the blue hills in the background. You need to highlight them. And it wouldn't really make sense to highlight them from the left, because it slopes down to the right and you want the sun to come between the hills at the back. And I'll highlight the grass at the back as well, and it'll make it have more depth because there's more overlap in shapes. I'll point that out when I get to the highlight in the background, and you'll see that the painting will get more depth. So usually just pick left or right for the sun, but try and do it where the most interest is going to happen. And if you're unsure, just try left or right, highlight some of the major shapes and see what happens, and go back if you have to. I like adding in some fences. It really gives the painting a lot of contrast. That's why I use fences, and usually I make them very light or very dark, because they stand out of the fields nicer. One thing to be careful about with things that are upright is you need to make sure they have a shadow or they don't look like they're on the floor. So simply use black in a layer below the fence and drop the opacity. So this is what I meant about creating depth. Now you can see that the sun comes between the two hills at the back, and that makes overlapping shapes. So now you got like 3 or 4 layers right at the back. So it makes the landscape have more depth. And this little detail I'm putting in now, this is about depth as well. because it's overlapping shapes. Overlapping shapes is one of the easiest ways to make landscapes look like they go far into the distance. So as much overlapping as you can possibly do without going crazy, obviously. Again, some overlapping shapes in the background. Again, creates more depth. And I keep the cloud simple. I usually do. It's a fairly bright day, so one cool thing you can do is make the clouds a bit too bright, like you've taken a bad photo. We're so used to seeing over whitened sky that we're kind of used to it. So again, lots of overlapping shapes everywhere. They're subtle, so obviously don't make them. Your overlapping shapes don't need to be massive. You don't want like massive trees everywhere. But the overlapping shapes are little things over other little things, and it all creates depth. I'm adding some sheep. I keep on trying to add sheep lately, and it's quite fun to add little animals. I make no attempt to make them look like sheep. I just hope they kind of look like something. And if they look like sheep, great. If they don't, doesn't really matter. I just try and put some heads and some legs wobbling all over the place, and if they look like sheep, great. Otherwise, they might just look like rocks or something, so it's not the end of the world. I'm at the detail stage now, and I'm putting in my flowers, which I like to do up front, for several reasons. It adds a bit of colour. Usually I use them very saturated, not so much this time. And again, overlapping shapes. And another one is that you want to have more detail up front. So it's an easy way to add detail up front. Again, it's all about depth. You have detail up front and less detail as you go back. So you'll notice some of the details I put in the back, like the trees, I don't highlight those because they're too far away. You wouldn't really see them. So I'm putting in my border, which I like to do. I like to mess up the border, make it interesting. I tried a textured border and I didn't like it. No other reason than I just didn't think it fit this type of painting. And so I went back to a kind of a messy, neat look, if that makes sense. And I thought I'd leave it white, but I went for black in the end because the simple reason with black, it makes the colors pop out. If you leave it white and you've got a lot of white in the painting, then you don't have much contrast. But with the black, it stands out a lot. If you imagine like lots of black t-shirts and you have lots of color on those, it's because it makes the colors look more interesting and more saturated, even without making them more saturated. Although they pop a lot anyway, white kind of blows them out. So I'm putting in some effects now, just for fun, really. You don't have to add them, but I like them to make the painting a bit more interesting. Remember if you're gonna put in effects, make sure they're subtle. So I dropped the sun rays down to like 2% or 3% or something like that in the opacity. It says you want them really subtle. I'm trying to jazz up the path. If it wasn't obvious, the path is the focus of this painting, so it's okay to be over detailed a little bit, but not too much. That's the reason I deleted the last one, is because I made it too detailed. For the path, I do something I don't usually do very often, which we'll get to. If you put in a new layer above the path and put in a big shape that's red, for example, you'll see I do it in a minute, and then you change the layer to be overlay and you drop the opacity, it'll be like you've put like a red stain over the path. Now, one thing that's good to do with the path is you make it bright whitish down into the distance, and you make it saturated up front. So here we go. I'm putting in the red now. It looks a bit funny because I'm choosing different modes. So once you get it into the right mode and you drop it down a little bit, it looks like I've just put orange into the path, or red, just to make it look more saturated up front. It's a subtle change, but it doesn't matter. If you take it out, the path will look a little bit boring. So I'm coming to the end now. If you like what you saw, give me a subscribe, and I'll see you later.